My name is Leslie Flores. Obviously, I'm not Leslie, but I'm a sophomore studying business entrepreneurship with a minor in nonprofit leadership, and I am the current president for the Prison Education Awareness Club, PEAC. And then it has a little story thing, which I can't tell you because I don't know it. Today, you'll hear amazing stories from our speakers who are made up of activists, educators, former prisoners, students, and alumni. Each speaker will allow time for questions at the end, but please feel free to type any questions you have for them in the chat throughout their presentation. Allow me to introduce Nala Brewer. Nala Brewer is the director for the prison education programming at Arizona State University and a senior lecturer in the School of Mathematical and Statistical Sciences. Nala has been teaching at ASU for 19 years, and she has been with PEP since her first year in the program. Nala is the faculty advisor, is one of them, because I'm the other one, for PEAC and for NPC, which is the Newton Project Club. Nala is currently working on establishing tablet-based classes in Arizona prisons due to COVID, of course, and will expand those classes nationally. So we hope we can get back into the prisons in person when we get back into our classes in person next semester, but we don't know. The prison may be a bit behind us. They certainly have a higher incidence of COVID, and because they're, prisoners are they're not the first priority for most lawmakers. But so anyway, that remains to be seen when we can get back in, but we have established a way to at least work with the privileged prisoners who already have tablets. So, and are taking classes elsewhere, so we can at least get in through that program. Okay, and Nala can tell you more about that because she knows more because she's been interacting on the front lines of that. So Nala, I'm going to turn it over to you. Spotlight yourself, please.
Okay.
And come forth and yeah.
Okay, good. Let's go out. Go put your helmet on.
Okay, we need to mute everybody except yourself, I guess.
Okay. And you might want to make Grace a co-host also, because the better, the more, the merrier. Thank you very much for that introduction. I started with PEP in 2016. Immediately fell in love with the work and the outreach that we were doing, and quickly got involved with teaching the classes and participating with the Prison Education Awareness Club and going to the conferences. And the most important thing is changing the lives of the incarcerated students by bringing in outside intellectual topics that they wouldn't have access to while they are in the prison. And the other important thing is I think that they get to see that there's a hope for the future, with these classes that they're taking, that they have something that they can be doing once they get out, that they can strive for. In fact, one of our speakers that we're going to have was a formerly incarcerated person who filled out all of his application materials and his financial aid materials, and he's actually a student at ASU. And we have other speakers also that are very supportive of the prison education topics that we're going to be doing. And we love to have new students come in to teach classes at the prisons. During COVID, we had an automatic shutdown, and we've been trying to find ways to go in there and bring them the course materials. And one of the good things that came out of COVID was that finally we're going to be able to start doing tablet education. It's not internet-based because they're not allowed to have access to the internet, but we're allowed to upload our course materials to a Canvas-like course shell, and then they can go into a tablet station and download those materials and do their coursework and upload them again through that tablet station. So we have many more avenues now. You can help from ASU by supporting the people who go in to teach in person, which we can't do that right now, but I assume within the next few months, we're going to be able to start doing that again. Or you can get involved with the new tablet courses that we're going to be doing. You can also get involved with the Prison Education Awareness Club, and you can get involved with the Newton Project Club, which is supporting the STEM education. But there's so many different ways that you can get involved. And not only will it change your life, but you'll also be changing the lives of the people that you go in to bring this education to. And research has shown that education is one of the #1 factors for reducing recidivism. And what I'm going to do is go back to introduce Corey. So allow me to introduce Corey Wells. She's an English faculty member. Corey directed the ASU Prison Education Programming, or PEP, from 2014 to 2020, and now co-directs PEP with myself. Corey first entered prison education programming through the Penn Project in 2011, wherein advanced student writer interns to provide anonymous critical feedback on prisoners' writing. That program has moved to the West Campus last year, where it is facilitated by liberal arts faculty Luis Mendoza and Lance Graham, for whom you will hear. And I will allow Corey now to give some more of the introduction for herself. So I'm going to go ahead and put the spotlight on Corey.
Apparently the spotlight feature isn't deleting the rest of us, because my husband just told me he could see me eating my breakfast. So I don't know how that works, but we have 2 people in the waiting room. I don't have the admit button for them. Can you?
Okay.
Let them in?
Thank you. They're joining.
Okay, great. All right. So that's wonderful. Okay. So, well, one of the other things I do, I'm the, you can, no, the share screen business is the pits. Okay. This is the most current issue of Iron City Magazine. I'm going to just take off. I'm going to do share screen for a moment so you can. Nah, maybe that's not working either. It's still that. But anyway, this is you can see the fantastic artwork by an incarcerated female prisoner this year. Mainly we have, work from male prisoners. It's filled with all kinds of art and other, one of the people in this year's issue you will hear from later in the conference, but beautiful art all the way through it. We have a partnership with Project Paint in Southern California, and we're teaming up soon with the Justice Arts Coalition. Oh gosh, I can't make it work. How do I get off that background? I just want to show the book, but well, I'll tell you what, you can go to it by ironcitymagazine.org, and you can see all the issues. You can they do come in both print and ironcitymagazine.org. They come in both print and hard copy, or online versions. You can read them for free, or you can purchase an online copy. So it's a beautiful magazine. It's slick. The design is beautiful, and we just received this week a $5,000 grant for our next issue. It comes out once a year, and it's only for incarcerated writers and artists, and it comes out once a year. And I'm the executive director. It's a nonprofit. I started it 7 years ago with one of my student interns as her honors thesis, and it's still going. And we have we have an award-winning poet now on the staff, and as our poetry editor, and she just recently published a book of poetry that was hailed by a former U.S. poet laureate and our state poet laureate from Arizona. So it's a really lovely magazine. And what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is just read you my current thinking, because I always write a one-page letter to the editor, letter from the editor, sorry. And I'll read that to you. And that's what I'm going to do. So, dear readers, life is messy, and I do not believe in justice. There are no magical scales that make things right. The weight we gain or don't gain must register. The pain we cause others and the pain we cause ourselves cannot be taken back. But we need not dwell in the pain forever. We abide in a meantime, the meantime, a lean time. Darkness teaches us to feel for the light. Life blesses us through challenges and trials, the raw material to grow from and through. Light outmaneuvers dark and is ultimately more abundant. The play of light on dark yields the dual vision of looking through a window and seeing ourselves in the world outside and the world outside in us. I don't believe in justice because it isn't real. It's not even possible. Justice is an idle wish, a false god, an idol. And I maybe should explain my thinking there, but you know, when all these cop shows where people say, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to get justice for this, love of your life that was just murdered." What would that even mean, to get justice? They're not going to bring that person back. I believe in something more redemptive than measuring and meting out. I believe in forgiveness and mercy, in the cup spilling over. The idea of justice diminishes, acts of mercy and forgiveness multiply. Justice is a bit player in the tyranny of ideas, small time theater. Yet we build societies, governments, departments on justice, the fantasy of control. Love your God with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself. Love yourself, love your neighbor, love God, and forgive everyone. These are the big principles. Few other generalizations need to be made. Mainly, there are individual stories to tell. In art, poetry, fiction, and memoir, the inhabitants of Iron City Magazine tell theirs. Through soul-wrought imagery, dialogue, and metaphor, through brave acts of imagination and of sometimes painful remembrance, stories enable readers and listeners to say, "I totally get that. I've been there, at least emotionally. I understand." And everyone involved feels a bit less lonely. Gathering around the metaphoric campfire to share our stories, we not only learn empathy, we also feel connection and hope. May you enjoy hope and feel joy in perusing this issue. Much love. So that's basically my take on justice. I don't think it's real, but I think that there's something better, and it's mercy and forgiveness. So that's what I would like to leave with you for the next moment. And then I get to introduce Nala Brewer, who's going to talk next. And I mean, Nala's kind of, did you already talk just now? No, it was just me, right?
I talked, so you're going to be introducing Ericka.
Oh, thank you for that. So those of you who've just joined, our Master of Ceremonies, the president of the Prison Education Awareness Club, who the club actually sponsors this conference every year. Nala and I help plan it, but we're not the main players. Had a death in the family last night and had to, in the middle of the night, travel to Mexico. So that's why it's going to be a little rough on the technology, because we're just stepping in at the last minute to put this together. She had it so smoothly run. She did a run through with us, and it was fantastic. So we'll just try to follow her example as best we can. I want to introduce our first keynote, and we feel extremely blessed to have her. Oh, wow. How is this not happening? Just a minute. It's going to take me a moment to get my stuff together. All right, here we go. Now I can pull it up. All righty. All right. So our first keynote, we have three. We finally got some funding approved very last minute, like this week or at the end of last week. So and we are able to have 3 keynotes, and they're all fantastic. But so Ericka Huggins is the first person I want to introduce to you. Ericka Huggins is an educator, leading Black Panther Party member. I'm thinking Angela Davis. Is that correct, Ericka? You'll probably tell us more, but former political prisoner, human rights advocate, and poet. For 45 years, Ericka has lectured in the United States and internationally on the principles of racial equity in our personal and work lives. So if you're thinking Black Panther is something really radical, it's only the radical belief that everybody matters. So as well as abolishing punitive practices and establishing restorative practices as we shift from mass incarceration, and that's something we must do. Ericka was professor of sociology and African American studies from 2008 through 2015 in the Peralta Community College District, and from 2003 to 2011 at California State University's East Bay and San Francisco. Ericka is a racial equity workshop and learning lab facilitator for World Trust Educational Services. She curates conversations focused on the individual and collective work of becoming equitable in our daily lives, as well as in the workplace. Additionally, she facilitates workshops on the benefit of spiritual practice in creating social change and the importance of self-care. So I happily give you Ericka Huggins, and I will now go figure out how to show her picture to you while she talks.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Nala, and thank you for being the people to take care of this beautiful event today at Arizona State University. And right now, I'm sending my well wishes to Leslie as she travels to be with family. And I'm wishing everybody who's present today the awareness that being here is a really great thing to do. I want to start by asking us to just breathe together, because we do anyway, but we can do it with intention. So just relax your shoulders away from your ears and notice that you're breathing. You don't have to fancy your breathing. Not hard work, just breathe. And as you do, breathe in and breathe out your goodness to anywhere in the world, in your state of Arizona, in your city, in your office, in your neighborhood. Breathe in and breathe out goodness. It's your goodness. You're sharing it. It doesn't cost anything. It won't take anything from you. So rest as you breathe. And it doesn't matter how you send your goodness. It can be in your first language. It can be totally just your silence and your goodness showing up at the borders to our United States for all those babies and children and families. For the families in Atlanta, Georgia. Breathe in, breathe out your goodness. To all of the people throughout Boulder, Colorado, and all of the families who have lost their beloveds. This time, as you breathe in, breathe out your goodness to all incarcerated men, women, and children. And remember to stay muted so that people can be silent. And this time, as you breathe out and breathe in some of that goodness and keep it for your own self. You sent it, now bring it back to you. For your brilliant mind, your generous heart, your able body at this time. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for taking care of yourselves as you did it. I'm talking today for a little while. We started later, so I'm not sure how much time I have, but Corey will let me know when I have 5 minutes more. But I want to start by talking about incarceration, the word itself. It means to hold a person in a place, often against their will. Nobody wants to go to prison or even to jail or even to be arrested or stopped and frisked or profiled or any of those things. So incarceration is inhumane. And unless there are special programs like PEP, thank you, Nala, or the Prison Education University Project in San Francisco, or some of the projects started in community that are brought in to correctional facilities, as they're called. They are not the antidote to being locked in a cell, sometimes in solitary, sometimes in deprivation cells, quite often for people who did not commit the crime, or in light of the horrors we're experiencing in our world, not just in the United States, but in our world in these times, in this 21st century. Often the people who create the most heinous crimes never get to see the inside of a cell or get any time in prison for their crimes against humanity. When I was 21 years old, I was incarcerated. And less than 3 months before that, my husband was killed at the age of 23. I was in one heartbeat, a widow and the single mother of a 3-week-old baby. So when I was incarcerated, I was grieving, I was taken from my daughter, and I was placed in solitary confinement. So as my bio that Corey read states, I believe in restorative practices. I don't believe in anything punitive. Restorative practices can restore justice, can repair harm. And it was in that little solitary cell that I began to understand that when we can forgive ourselves first and also others for harm done, when we can talk about it, when we can be with it, when we can do the repairing of harm, we can heal. We can heal. And I began to heal all alone in a solitary cell because I decided that I wasn't going to allow the punitive, hostile environment I was in that kept me in a tiny cell to make me any less loving of humanity, to be any less human, or to be treated as any less human. I didn't come in with all of that understanding, but it was sitting every day for meditation that gave me an awareness. Who told me to meditate? I thought it would be a good idea because I missed my daughter so. She was 3 months old by the time I was arrested. And I could only see her for 1 hour each Saturday. And my mother-in-law, John Huggins' mother, who had lost her only son, brought our daughter every Saturday for that 1 hour. So I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to have the baby feel my sadness and confusion. And all I wanted her to feel was my love. And so as a result of sitting quietly every day and breathing just like we did, only I wasn't talking about it, I was just sitting with it, I was able pretty soon to visit with my daughter and not cry. I just wanted to show up. There are many programs like this that enter the prisons. However, they are so policed that sometimes they're not able to do what they're intended to do. Why am I sharing this story? Because I do believe in abolishing prisons. And I also know that there are 2.3 million people housed in them and more being handled by probation and parole. I was only incarcerated for 2 years and 14 months in solitary confinement. And when the state that I was in decided that that was cruel and unusual punishment for me, because the fear was of my words were considered contraband, the state let me out of solitary to be with the population of women housed there. And I want to tell you, I only met one woman who was there for a violent crime, and she wasn't well. She wasn't mentally, spiritually well. Women were there for prostitution, for check fraud, for things that come to women who live in conditions of poverty. And so I started a project. It was an idea I had with a friend of mine named Millie, whose family was from Puerto Rico. And there I am, an African American woman. We represented the body of women in that prison. And Black and brown women are the fastest growing population of incarcerated women. And if the huge populations of Black and brown men, and now Southeast Asian men, are already filling the many, 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 many jails and prisons and detention centers for immigrants, then if the women are incarcerated, what about the children? What about the children? So I believe that prisons should be abolished. And I also believe that the people in them, until prisons can be fully abolished, should be cared for in a completely different way. Simply that they have real food, that in the wintertime they are not freezing in cement and steel, that in the summer they can breathe fresh air. I have been in prisons that do this, and it's a different environment. And that means that somebody in the topmost structure of that city or that state has made it that way. So if we're looking for something to do, if we're looking for one step we can take to make it different for the people who are housed in all of these prisons and jails, perhaps we can use our privileges to speak to the people in power and ask them to cede power when it comes to incarceration. I believe in humanity, so I believe there have to be good people who would be willing. And I'm sure that Corey and Nala and Leslie and others know some of those people. If I could see you, I can't, and I'm sorry that I can't, but if I could see you all, I'm sure that if I asked the question, do you have a loved one, family or friend, who is incarcerated, you would probably say, particularly if you were Black, Indigenous, people of color, you would say yes. Or you would put your raise hands sign on your Zoom tile. It's like that wherever I go. Did you know that California builds and houses the most prisoners in the United States? Sunny California. We can stop building prisons and we can restore justice by having more in-community programs. And somebody's mind will say, oh, well, what about the murderers and the rapists? They represent, did you know this? They represent somewhere around 5% of the 2.3 million people incarcerated. I'm talking about community programs that would save states and the federal government a lot of money, because if you look at how much money it takes to house one adult, man or woman, is outrageous. We can do it differently. Australia does it different. If you don't believe me, read about the Australia use of prison monies to create community integration programs, to move people out of prison into community programs from which they can go to work, they can go to school. When Corey said we have to face the high numbers of incarcerated people in our prisons and jails who are suffering with COVID and dying of COVID, and the guards who refuse to be vaccinated, we know that there is something quite wrong. When I was released into the regular inmate population, when I was incarcerated, there was not a virus like this, but there was a little infirmary that you could go to. Well, prison infirmaries now, or prison hospitals, if they're huge places, are overwhelmed. And so prisoners are being transported from the overwhelming environment of death and suffering from COVID to other prisons where they are creating a super spreader environment. We need to use our privileges to say something, to step up, to speak out, and allow people to understand that this is not humane. I wonder how many people, faculty and staff and students at Arizona State University believe that prisons are important to keep. And I wonder how many of those people, I'm just a curious person, believe that they would want that for their son, their daughter, their niece, their nephew, their uncle, their auntie, their father, their mother, their grandmother, their grandfather. Yes, there are elders sitting in prison who've been there for 40, 50, 60 years. We have to bring it home to our hearts. There's a lot to reflect on. Maybe nothing you can do right at this moment if you feel that prisons have a victory. But allow the thought in, what if this were your family member? What would you do? Or if they needed to stay there in prison, what would you want for them? I've already talked about the women's prison I was in, but I think that sometimes when we think about incarcerated people, we're thinking men, and we're thinking Black men, and we're thinking brown men. And there are also white men, usually poor or living in conditions of poverty, who are incarcerated as well. I want to have you notice the fact that quite often we don't mention women, and there aren't very many programs for women who are incarcerated. And then there are I call them children because they're between 13 and 17 years old. They're teenagers in the juvenile prisons. And the big one here in the county I'm in California, I'm in Northern California, in Oakland, across the bay from San Francisco. The one that is 20 minutes from where I live is called the Juvenile Justice Facility. And I don't understand how those two words, juvenile and justice, go together. Some of the incarcerated people there, the few that are still there because of COVID, because many were released, but the people in most need are still there. Some of them are so short because they're 13 that when the roll call happens, I used to go to this prison before COVID and show up and talk about whatever I was asked to talk about. I will always do that when it comes to students and young people incarcerated and children anywhere. I think it's important that we share whatever skills and experience and whatever little bit of wisdom we have with the generations now and to come. But I was telling you about this being there. Actually, I was physically there when the roll call happened. Before I was to speak, everybody had to be locked in. And then they would stand near the window in their door, a tiny window. And there was one little girl that was so short that I could only see the top of her head. Why was she there? Why do we allow for this? Well, I think that, we need to look at structural inequity. We need to look at structural racism. If nearly 70% of the incarcerated people are Black and brown, there is hope in numbers. By that I mean that if we give a little bit of time and effort to changing the ways in which prisons feed, house, clothe, and treat incarcerated people, that would be wonderful. And there are other carceral sites as well. Let's not forget that. Families living under the throes of domestic violence, that's a carceral site. Teenagers who are forced into prostitution, They don't willingly do sex work. They're forced into prostitution at age 11 or 14. Whoever's holding them, that's a carceral site. We live in a punitive culture. That's what I'm talking about, everybody. And we can shift that first. Well, simultaneously, we can shift it by looking first in our own hearts about what we're ignoring and what we don't want to talk about. We've been taught not to talk about racism. And we are also taught not to talk about sexism. We worry about how we will be perceived. I learned early in my life to look at how I want to live. And when I die, and I will, as we all who are born will one day, I would say to myself, when I die, do I want it to be said that she was a good woman? Or do I want it to say that she did things to help humanity? Well, I love both. So, what do you want in your life? I think I'm going to stop now. And I think I'd like to hear your questions because I love more than talking with people. I love listening to people, especially if they have an idea or a question. You know, questions are really precious things. Questions don't just lead to answers, they lead to deeper questions. And eventually, together, those in conversation can come to the answers. So, Corey, if we can shift to the questions that people would like to ask, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Ericka. This is Nala. Corey actually had a question for you. She had typed it in here. And it says, let me get it here. It says, question for Ericka. Solitary confinement came to enrich you. It makes many people literally insane. Jimmy Santiago Baca tells the same story of his confined. He recalled his childhood and youth, brought himself back to himself. How and why were you able to do this while solitary makes so many mentally incompetent, especially younger prisoners?
I had a legal team that worked almost volunteer because people loved the Black Panther Party because of the work we were doing in community. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did not love us. The local police departments did not love us because we were pointing out police brutality. And we were also pointing out how, and we could see this on January 6th, right? How government agencies tend to look for and criminalize Black and Brown people. So our legal team was absolutely unbelievable. And so when I had the notion of taking better care of myself, for the sake of my daughter originally, I went to one of my lawyers who took good care of himself. He was, 30 years older than me, and he was trim and fit and clear. And I found out that he practiced yoga. So I asked him for a book. Now, what made me go to him and ask him for a book, I can't tell you. But I do know this, that programs that take care of incarcerated people really work and reduce recidivism. And I worked in one of those programs in the early 2000s in San Bruno County Jail. It was called the Sister Project. And it still exists. And it was created by a woman who also had been a member of the Black Panther Party. You see, we were very, very community oriented. We invested our hearts and souls in community. And this woman, Cheryl Dawson, made an arrangement with the sheriff's department, a local drug treatment and recovery program called Delancey Street and put into place the very first ever in prison drug treatment and recovery program. And I had the great good fortune of working in it. And I watched women's lives transform. I wasn't going in to save anybody or to fix anybody. This is a notion that sometimes people have when they go. I was going because I needed to give back to any environment that I knew was ruthless in its intention to keep people in check, keep their heads in check, their bodies in check, their emotions in check, their spirits in check. And so if young incarcerated people are suffering, it's because the intention is for them to suffer. And again, we can use our privileges and speak up where we can to have that stop so that people in solitary have the support that they need. There is a book called Solitary. And those of you who are working with the Prisoner Education Club, Awareness Club, can get it. A friend of mine wrote this book, and his name is Albert Woodfox. He was released from solitary confinement after having been confined in solitary 47 years. Who does that? Why? And also, he was a young man when he went in, an elder when he came out. This is just a few years ago when he was released. And when I met him and had him sign my copy of the book, I mean, he was a friend of mine. He was a member of the Black Panther Party. I didn't have words. I handed him my book and I said, I'm so happy you're no longer inside. And I felt like I wanted to laugh and hug him and cry all at the same time. But I didn't. I was respectful because I know what it's like to re-enter from 2 years of prison. You're not the same person that you were when you went in. And 47 years, I couldn't imagine. And I said, I am so glad that I can be here and just hold your hand. I didn't ask him how he did it, or did he have a formula, or what was his advice, or any of that. He said, yes, I spent 47 years and I remain unbroken. So maybe that's a book that some incarcerated people can read. Maybe not, but maybe people who run programs for incarcerated people, maybe prison guards, maybe prison wardens could read that book. There's information there. So thank you for asking that question. I guess what I'm saying is that programs that help young women and men and children to love themselves where they are and to find some amount of freedom on the inside. And that has a lot of double meaning, would really shift their experience. And if they need mental health support, they should have it. If they need emotional support, they should have it. If they are artists, they should be able to create art that is cathartic. If they're musicians, they should be. We think of prisoners all as criminals. That word, I'm troubled by that word. However, we don't think of them as artists and dancers and poets and painters and architects and storytellers, but it's all there. So I hope I've answered your question. Is there another question?
Corey had one more question, and then there are a couple of questions after that also.
Okay, and I want to encourage really loving you.
I'm sorry, encourage what?
I would encourage students to ask questions. Just put a question in the chat and I'll try my best to answer it.
Okay, yeah, you do have a couple of questions from the students too after Corey's question. I'll read those out too. So Corey's other question was, especially criminal to deny nature to prisoners given nature's healing properties. Thoughts on this?
When I was in solitary confinement, and it continued while I was in the general inmate population, I was only allowed to have a walk outside in nature. Maybe if somebody had the time to walk Huggins, you know, I wasn't even a complete person, I was just Huggins. And the wing I was in, an isolation wing that I was in, was nicknamed the Panther wing. And when the guards would come to bring food, I could hear them on their walkie-talkies. I had to laugh at it. So, I mean, you can't spend your whole time crying. But they would say, I'm going to feed the panthers. And there was this feeling of being in a zoo, right? So to deny nature from humans who come to Earth through nature is inhumane. And that's another thing that I saw at San Bruno County Jail. The women in the Sister Project were able not only to walk outside, but they created food gardens on the grounds of the jail. It was a horticulture program. It was for real. If they were released, they would have a degree so that they could do this for their livelihood. These people before the Sister Project had said, we should lock them up and throw away the key. They don't deserve anything. And that's the thinking about incarcerated people in some minds. But we can change the minds of people if they're close to us by just having a conversation, not an argument, not a debate, not a row, not a fight. But we could pose some questions. Questions are precious things. So thank you for your questions, Corey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erica. And the next question is from Imogen Airrate, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. And the question is, how do you envision restorative justice on a daily operational basis?
Well, thank you for your question. And on a daily operational basis, I think I have to look big picture first at the police departments, right? I don't quite have it worked out what can happen there, but I do know that once people are brought to jail, if there are restorative practitioners in the jail, and there is a growing number, then part of their reception would be more welcoming. And then there are judges and lawyers who practice restorative justice or have restorative practices in high places, not just local judges, but in other places. And they are looking at how is it that we adjudicate people? How many years do we give somebody who writes a bad check? 10? Well, no. The opportunities are in restoring justice for each human being. And also being a person who entered a restorative dialogue with the person who was convicted of conspiring to kill my husband, I know the benefit of day to day talking to someone who is asking your forgiveness and trying to figure out how to forgive themselves. He, by the way, didn't do anything. He was arrested because under conspiracy laws, because they couldn't reveal the real killer. There was some other government orchestration going on. But we entered a restorative dialogue for 3 years. And after 3 years, the prison warden changed, and I was able to meet him in person. And on the day that I met him at San Quentin, I was able to answer all the questions because he was there the day my husband had been killed, John Huggins, also a member of the Black Panther Party. I was able to ask him every question that for decades I'd wanted to ask. What did he look like that day? Did you speak to him before he was shot? I wonder if he suffered. You went into the room, I said to him, this person I was in dialogue with, because your cousin was in there in a state of shock, and you pulled your cousin out. Did you see their bodies? Did they look as if they had suffered before they died? We know a human face when we see one. We know suffering when we see it. And he was able to tell me they, meaning my husband, John Huggins, and my friend, my dear friend, Alprentice Bunchy Carter, who were both members of the Black Panther Party and both killed that day intentionally. He was able to tell me that they both looked like they were sleeping. I had so many seemingly small questions that you ask yourself and want to ask another when someone passes suddenly and violently. And he was able to answer. And we're friends. And now, by the way, he's no longer incarcerated. What does it look like day to day when his parole officer and his lawyer asked if I would write a letter encouraging his parole? I did. And now he's able to be with grandchildren he'd never met and with his children, all of them. And he's living as full a life as he can after many decades of being incarcerated. It also looks day to day is that you're treating the human beings around you as if they are human beings, that you're noticing your judgments, your biases, your prejudices. By that I mean, for instance, I don't mean just one kind of prejudice. You might notice something that you've harbored since childhood that makes you distrust people who look like this or look like that or wear their hair like this or dress like that or have these many tattoos. Whatever it is, you practice non-judgmental awareness. And if you have the opportunity to sit in a restorative justice circle where the person who has brought harm and the person who's been harmed are sitting with friends, and many, many elementary schools, middle and high schools are doing this. They're not incarcerated, although public schools do create a pipeline to prison for some students. So I've sat in those circles too, and it's the most uplifting thing. The more uplifting is to sit in a circle of men or women at a place like San Quentin and hear them tell their stories. And there are 3 principles that I really love about restorative practice as it relates to restorative justice for incarcerated people, is that the speaker is responsible, accountable, and if it is at all possible, ask forgiveness, which is why my friend reached out to me from San Quentin to start that dialogue. So, Nala, I hope that answers that person's question.
Yes, I think that was a very good answer. Thank you. Do you have time for another question?
Yes, it depends on how much time you all have.
Yeah, it looks like you have
20 minutes, actually, I think.
excellent. Yeah. So this is a good question. It says, it's from Michael Baden. It says, while I agree that most unjustified incarcerations, that many are unjustified. However, I would like to hear your vision on dealing with murders or rapists and the like.
That this wealthy country provide them the help that they need, rather than allowing prison guards and others to further harm them. They've already been harmed. When I sat in those circles, particularly the circles, um, because I had been in a restorative dialogue about the death of my husband, I was invited to come in and share what it was like to be on the other end, outside, not in prison. But I was carrying with me, of course, my lived experience of being incarcerated. But what I heard in those circles that I often visited, and the women as well, is I would say many of them, statistics say 1 in 4 men and 1 in 3 women are sexually, physically, emotionally, spiritually harmed as children. And that is what I heard the men particularly talk about. And we live in a society that tells men, as little boys, you can't cry. You can't talk about what's bothering you. You have to have the posture of strength. So, of course, if you are harmed, you will harm others. So I think if this country could provide mental wellness of some kind, or find beds for them in hospitals rather than in mental hospitals, rather than preventing them a bed in a mental hospital and locking them away forever, that exacerbates whatever is going on. In answer to the person's question, I don't know a person that hasn't created harm. I think if we think about harm in our lives and we can't go back there and do anything about it, we would recognize that we wouldn't want to be held in check for the worst day of our lives.
Mm.
No one wants that. So we could be more empathetic and compassionate. And it takes not seeing a human being as other, as an animal.
Mhm. Could I say one thing here, just because it's kind of to tell on myself in a kind of negative way, but also a positive
Just a
one.
second, Corey. I want to make sure, though, that I
Yeah.
acknowledge that I answered this person's question. Do you think that I did? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that was an excellent answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
No. And I don't want to take a lot of your time. This will be like a 1 minute summary, but I had been working in prison education for 5 years when I saw the documentary narrated by Forrest Whitaker called Serving Life. And it's about the male prisoners in Angola, in Louisiana. And
Yes.
it's one of, they send the hardened criminals there, the people who are never getting out, right? So but I saw that, and I used to just think of education as economical, because we spend in Arizona over 4 times or about 4 times per incarcerated individual per year of taxpayers' money, what we spend on K through 12 students, and that's just ridiculous.
That's
So,
right.
but so I used to think of it in practical terms, you educate, you liberate, but then I saw this film, and it's so tender. I would recommend it to anybody. Serving Life, narrated by Forrest Whitaker, the Academy Award winner. But so because they had such a large aging population who were suddenly in hospice care, they couldn't care for them with state money anymore. So what they did was they hired, you applied for it, and they hired other lifers to come in and be their hospice workers, and watching both the growth of both the men who were dying and the men who were caretaking, washing people's privates, wiping them, taking care of them in such a loving way. And they maybe had never touched anybody like this in their lives, in this caring, loving way. And watching them change up through their very last breath. That
Yes.
changed everything for me. I suddenly thought it's beyond economics. It's way beyond that. It's about the human being who can grow till he or she dies, right? Till the
Exactly.
very last minute.
This is what we want for our loved ones, right?
Mhm.
I consider all of humanity my loved ones. And so if I do, then I have to think differently about those people who are living in perennially harmful situations. I wanted to mention to you something you might not know about Angola, and then I will, go on to the next question. Um, when the Smithsonian Museum, the new one for African American history and culture, and if you have not been there, it's in Washington, D.C., when uh, the temporary closures of everything conclude or diminish, or COVID, please go if you haven't already. Inside that museum is a real Angola prison cell on one of the floors. And I stood there when I first went, I stood there for a really long time. And I read the placard on the wall that said, and you can look this up, I'm not making it up. I wish, there's some things in history that I wish I was making them up or exaggerating, because then it would just be crazy Ericka. But this is the truth. That land on which Angola sits was a slave plantation. And it was named Angola because of all of the African men who were enslaved that were housed there. And what on earth had they done? Probably they tried to run away from slavery. I don't know. And it was called Little Angola at first, and then it became Angola, and now it is a prison. One of the largest, one of the most horrible. I just wanted everybody to think about that. How a plantation ideology or a way of thinking has impacted us right to today, right now, in stop and frisk, in profiling, in the death of George Floyd,
Mm.
in the shooting of Breonna Taylor, in the chasing by community people of Ahmaud Arbery, who was just running,
Mhm.
jogging.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of work to do, and we can do it with a sense of hope in our hearts. I wanted to say something else before I forget it. I have a friend who has written a most remarkable book. The book is called Marking Time, and her name is Nicole Fleetwood. You must get this book. One of her family members was incarcerated, and after some time, let everybody know that he was an artist, an incredible artist. And this book is devoted to incarcerated artists. Marking Time, Nicole Fleetwood. Okay? And I'm trying to give you resources that will help you in the work that PEP does and in the work that PEAC does, and in the work that you'll do, hopefully, beyond beyond Arizona State University students. So, Nala, is there another question? Thank you, Corey.
Yes, we have 2 more questions. I think that's what we'll have time for because we have about 10 minutes left. This has been wonderful. So this is a good question from Lana Musa. It says, I have a question for Ericka. Hypothetically, if some government official approached you tomorrow and asked for your help to begin aggressively reforming prisons on a global scale, what would be the first issue that you believe would need to tackle? And she's got one other follow-up question. Would it be mental illness or something else? The problems surrounding the incarceration system are so extensive. So where do we begin to create global and permanent change?
And Lana was the peace president last year. So, we have 2 peace presidents here already. We'll have another one later today. Former. People don't quit this once they get out of it. They're in it for life.
Thank you. So sorry about the background noise. I live in an environment where there's construction going on and there's a lot happening. So the first part of the question was what again, Nala?
Let's see. If someone asked you for your help to begin aggressively reforming prisons on a global scale, what would be the first issue that you believe would need to be tackled?
The first thing that came to my mind when you first asked the question was that nationally, and this of course would include any territory of the United States, nationally ban shackling women in childbirth. It still occurs. Isn't that just break your heart, Nala? Can you imagine where a birthing woman is going to go in childbirth?
I didn't know that was happening.
Yes, if a lot of people think that it stopped during the time that Assata Shakur was pregnant and birthing. That was in the early 70s. She was shackled in childbirth. But I wonder I have 3 children. Where I was only thinking about birthing this child. I didn't want to go anywhere. I couldn't physically. So it's just inhumane. I don't think we shackle cows and sheep when they're birthing. So I don't even know if it's thinking of us as animals, but this criminalization takes away our humanity. Again, I want to repeat, mostly Black and brown people are incarcerated, men, women, and children. So that would be the first thing. And then that would, depending on the person who came to visit me, I love this question. I would ask, what do you think about that? And just as you said, Nala, that person might not even know about shackling in childbirth. And then I would think, well, what about having what some other countries do, having in-community programs for women with small children? So they're not separated from them and stand the chance of the state, whatever state they're in, taking their babies, their children away. Thank goodness I had a family member. Why we have so many children today, young adults today, who were raised by grandmothers or aunties or foster homes, or they're incarcerated themselves. There's a link between the incarceration of parents and the proliferation of young people who are incarcerated. So I would abolish right away the
Mhm.
prisons for people under 18. I would just get rid of them. Oh,
Mhm.
thank goodness. I go in there enough to know there's nothing good really happening unless some angel, like a friend of mine who works inside the county facility here near Oakland, brings in community people. There are always good people on the inside who can think beyond locking people up and obeying those rules that are inhumane. Um, I also would have a steeper screening for prison wardens, and I don't know any other name they're called by, but they're usually wardens. I would have some kind of psychological screening that is done by an outside source so that we could see what their
Mm.
thinking is, because some of the old and stagnant policies, procedures, and systems would leave if there is a good person at the helm of the ship. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's what happened in San Bruno. The head of the sheriff's department was a formerly incarcerated man. And that's why the Sister Project was able to finally be put in place at San Bruno. Um, I would bring in real healthcare professionals. When I was incarcerated, women would do anything not to go to the prison hospital.
Mm.
They do anything because I don't know, the first thing I was told about the doctors there, and that was then, and I don't know that much has changed on the inside because they're invisible communities. If there were community stewards on the outside that visited the prisons often, a lot would change, but a lot is unseen. So the women I was incarcerated with said, if you have a toothache, don't go to the dentist. He gets joy out of pulling teeth. He'll just pull it whether it's rotten or not. And the doctors are creeps. And so I'm saying, remembering that, and I'm saying what we should do is rethink healthcare, like that poignant story from the film that Whitaker narrated. That is a story of humanity, compassion, and empathy. And there was a second part to that question, wasn't there? Or was there?
You
Um,
have about 5 minutes too, so we're probably this is the last question. What was the second part? Can we just unmute Lana? Yeah, let Lana talk for herself. She's coming to us all the way from the Canary Islands. I have no idea what time it is there. She's doing a Fulbright there.
No worries. It's still evening here. Thank you so much, Ericka, by the way. This is such an honor to meet you and hear from you.
I want to say it's an honor to meet you. And you're one of the only people I can see. And I'm sorry that I didn't know that. What time is it in the Canary Islands?
Well, there's a 7-hour difference. So right now it's 7 p.m.
Oh, that's not so bad.
No.
Yeah, no, it's still early. And I'm genetically programmed not to go to bed before like 2 a.m. It's a problem. So it's no big deal. But the second part of my question, I mean, you've sort of already answered it actually through your whole wonderful talk. But there is actually, I want, if I may, there's one person who's also sent a question. I don't know if we have time for that, but since you've answered basically mine, someone else sent a chat.
What is
Nala,
it?
I don't know if you can see it, but
If you can see it, Lana, can you just read the question?
yeah, it's by, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your name. I believe it's Iran. And they ask, how important or unimportant is the architecture of prison design? I've seen prisons in Sweden that emphasize the importance of basic human comforts much more than prisons in America. These places see prison as more of a rehabilitation experience than punitive. And so the architecture of the rooms, the common spaces, furniture, the size of the windows, the personal effects that people are allowed all create a more comfortable, potentially healing experience of the incarcerated. Is this an important path forward for American prisons? Is this possible for American prisons?
I believe that all things are possible. I may not live to see them, but I have to have hope that everything that we need for one another is possible. Is it feasible? Yes. Yes. And at the Sister Project, one of the first things they did, it was a typical jail. It was kind of sterile and wide open, but the women were not allowed to use the restroom with a door on it, which meant that a guard on a tower somewhere else was watching them. Is that humane, Lana? No. So
Not at
that
all.
the women would hold up, another woman would come and hold up a piece of cardboard so that the woman would have privacy. And why was a male guard chosen? Could it have been I mean, my mind just went with, this is ridiculous, whichever way I turn it. But I think that architecture for basic comforts not only heals, but it also makes those in power more able to see people as human. The guards who are refusing to be vaccinated, what is that about? COVID vaccines, I'm talking about. Well, it would save their lives, but it would also save other lives because the guards are the ones that come and go. But back to architecture, I feel that having been where I was, if the architecture had been different for the common spaces where the women inhabited, if there was less concerned about policing us than letting us live since we were living there, it would have been different. And often I would sit and draw pictures of how it would look differently. And Sweden also has a different kind of culture when it comes to looking carefully at what humans need. It just has that history. So we can take our cues from places like that. And Australia opens homes that actually have bedrooms and, dining spaces and living areas and common areas and kitchens in their community programs. So this would really probably be a wonderful space, particularly for people who haven't had very much comfort in their lives before they come to prison. So I think this is very, very key. And I would ask Euron to think about how they could come to make a proposal for this. This is a beautiful thing that could happen in the United States with one correctional department that decides to take it on. So I love it. And Euron, thank you for asking that question and posing it in a way that is really understanding and compassionate. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I know that we're out of time now, and there are other things happening for you during your day. Thank you again, Corey. Thank you, Nala. Thank you, Lena. And thank you to all of the other people who made this, are making this event possible. I'm going to go on, but you won't. You have a full day ahead of you, and enjoy it, and make sure that you not only take things away with you, but that you consider the things that you've heard and see what you can do for your neighbors in our world. Thank you so much.